I was sitting in my own chair when my son pushed me with such force that I fell to the floor, hitting my head. 14 people saw it. Not one lifted a finger to help me as he sat in my place and laughed. Before continuing, subscribe and activate the notification bell because every day we publish new stories. Leave your like and tell us in the comments from which city and country you are watching us. My name is John Miller. I am 67 years old, and for 32 years, I built from scratch an automotive parts import company in Chicago. I started in 1991 with a small rented warehouse and a bank loan that took me 8 years to fully pay off. Every screw, every part, every customer gained represented sleepless nights, sacrificed weekends, and the firm conviction that I was building something valuable, not just for myself, but especially for my son Ryan. That December night in 2023, we had organized the company's annual dinner at an elegant restaurant in downtown Chicago. It was a tradition I had maintained for 20 years, bringing together key employees, partners, and some important clients to celebrate another year of working together. That year in particular, we had special reasons to celebrate. We had closed contracts with 3 new distributors in the southern United States, and our sales volume had grown by 18% compared to the previous year. I was sitting at the head of the main table, as always. To my right was Thomas Stone, my minority partner and friend for 30 years. To my left, I had left an empty chair, waiting for Ryan, who had arrived late, as had become his custom in recent months. The table was splendidly decorated, with crystal glasses reflecting the warm lights of the private room we had reserved. 14 people shared that space, 5 trusted employees with their partners, Thomas, 2 important clients, and myself. We were on the second course when Ryan finally appeared. He was 38 years old, wearing a dark grey suit I had given him months ago, and he had that annoyed expression that lately seemed permanent on his face. He didn't greet anyone specifically. He simply entered the room, looking at his cell phone as if he were alone in the world. What happened next occurred so quickly that my mind took several seconds to fully process it. Ryan approached from behind my chair without saying a word. I was talking to Thomas about a new supplier when I felt my son's hands on my back. It wasn't a gentle touch or a friendly pat. It was a violent, brutal, completely unexpected shove. The force was such that my body shot forward. I lost my balance completely and fell face down onto the restaurant's marble floor. The impact was terrible. My head hit first, then my right shoulder, and finally my hip. The pain was instant, sharp, throbbing. I felt a metallic taste in my mouth and realized I had bitten my lower lip. My glasses flew off my face, and I heard them shatter about 3 feet away. But the worst wasn't the physical pain. What was truly devastating was what happened in the next 30 seconds. From the floor, stunned and confused, I turned my head to look around. 14 pairs of eyes watched me, 14 people who knew me, who worked with me, who had shared years of joint effort. And not one, absolutely no one, made the slightest move to help me. The silence was dense, heavy, almost palpable. No one spoke, no one stood up, no one extended a hand. It was as if my fall had frozen time and turned everyone into pillars of salt. Even Thomas, my friend of 3 decades, had frozen with his fork halfway between his plate and his mouth, looking at me with an expression I couldn't interpret at the time. And then I heard Ryan's laugh. It wasn't a nervous or uncomfortable laugh. It was an open, genuine guffaw full of satisfaction. My son sat in my chair, exactly in the spot I had occupied seconds before, and said in a loud, clear voice for everyone to hear, "Move, you stupid old man. You take up too much space." The words echoed in that private room, as if someone had amplified them with a megaphone. I felt each syllable pierce me like a sharp knife. It wasn't just the physical violence of the push, nor even the public humiliation of lying on the floor. It was the brutal confirmation of something I had been denying for months. My own son despised me. I remained on the floor for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. No one moved. No one spoke. The dinner continued as if nothing had happened. I heard the clinking of cutlery against plates, the murmur of conversations timidly resuming, the sound of wine glasses being refilled. Finally, I gathered my strength and stood up on my own. My knees trembled, my head throbbed with a dull, constant pain. I felt dampness on my right temple, and when I touched it, my fingers were stained with blood. But what hurt most was inside my chest, a mixture of humiliation, betrayal, and a sadness so profound it was hard to breathe. I looked at Ryan sitting in my chair, my place, calmly eating from the plate that had been served for me. I looked at the 14 people who had witnessed my fall and hadn't lifted a finger. And at that moment, as I stood, with blood running down my temple and my legs still trembling, I made the most important decision of my life. I said nothing. I didn't make a scene. I didn't demand explanations or shout insults. I simply walked towards the restaurant exit with all the dignity I could muster. Every step was agony, but I kept my head high and my back straight. I left that place knowing that something had ended forever that night, but something else had also begun, something Ryan couldn't even imagine. As the cold December air hit my face on the street, I wiped the blood from my temple with a handkerchief and knew with absolute certainty that that shove, that public humiliation, that scornful laugh would be the catalyst for the most radical transformation my son could ever have anticipated. I arrived home that night with stained clothes and a sore body. My wife Claire had passed away 6 years ago from cancer, so I entered an empty apartment where only silence awaited me. I sat on the living room sofa without even turning on the lights, letting the darkness envelop me, while my mind drifted back decades. I remembered the March afternoon in 1985 when Ryan was born at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago. He weighed 7 pounds, 8 ounces, and had the most expressive eyes I had ever seen. Claire and I cried with happiness, holding that small life in our arms. We promised to give him everything we didn't have: education, opportunities, unconditional love. The first years were magical. Ryan was a curious, intelligent child, full of questions about how the world worked. On Sundays, I would take him to the warehouse when the company was still barely a dream materialized in 2,000 square feet of rented space. He would run among the shelves of automotive parts, fascinated by the gears, screws, and tools. He would ask me what each thing was for, and I would explain with infinite patience. When he turned 12 in 1997, I began teaching him the fundamentals of the business. I showed him how to check inventories, how to deal with suppliers, how every client deserved respect, regardless of the size of their order. Ryan absorbed those lessons with genuine enthusiasm. I remember his illuminated face when we closed our first big contract with a chain of repair shops. He was 14 years old and told me, "Dad, someday we will make this company the most important in the Midwest." I paid for the best private schools in Chicago. He studied business administration at Northwestern University, graduating with honors in 2007. Claire and I attended his graduation ceremony, overflowing with pride. He publicly thanked us in his speech, acknowledging the sacrifices we had made to give him that opportunity. My wife cried with emotion, and I felt that all the years of hard work had been worth it. Ryan officially started working for the company in 2008, just as the economic crisis brutally hit the United States. They were difficult years. Many businesses closed, but we survived precisely because we worked together. He brought innovative ideas about digital presence and online marketing, while I maintained relationships with old suppliers who gave us credit when the banks closed their doors. During those tough years, between 2008 and 2013, we developed an exceptional professional connection. Ryan would arrive at the warehouse before me. He would stay late reviewing accounts. He proposed creative strategies to reduce costs. We would have dinner together several times a week at home, analyzing challenges and celebrating small victories. Claire would watch us from the kitchen, with that smile that meant my two men conquering the world. Then Claire fell ill. It was in 2015 when she received the diagnosis of advanced ovarian cancer. The world collapsed. Ryan was present throughout the process. He accompanied his mother to chemotherapy sessions. He sat by her bed in the hospital, reading her books she loved. He made her laugh, even on the darkest days. When Claire died in March 2018, Ryan hugged me at the funeral and promised, "I will never leave you alone, Dad. We are a team." But something began to change subtly afterward. At first, I attributed it to shared grief. Ryan became more distant, less communicative. He spent more time out of the office without clear explanations. When I asked him, he responded evasively or with irritation. I thought he needed space to process his mother's loss. In 2019, he met Nicole Clark at a business conference in New York City. She worked for a financial consulting firm. She was attractive, ambitious, and spoke confidently about accelerated growth strategies. Ryan was immediately fascinated. They started dating, and he changed in ways I couldn't interpret at the time. They married in June 2019 in a costly ceremony that I fully financed. 120 guests, a 5-star hotel on the coast, a live band, fireworks. I spent $83,000 because I wanted my son to have the wedding of his dreams. During the banquet, Ryan dedicated an emotional toast to me, thanking me for everything I had done for him. Nicole smiled beside him, but her eyes evaluated the room, the guests, the display of resources with an expression I couldn't decipher. The following months brought evident changes. Ryan began to question my decisions in the company. Proposals that we used to discuss with respect now generated tense arguments where he raised his voice and I tried to keep calm. Nicole occasionally attended business meetings without being invited, offering opinions on restructurings that always involved reducing my participation in key decisions. Family dinners became uncomfortable. Ryan arrived late, constantly checked his phone, and responded with monosyllables when I tried to converse. Nicole made seemingly innocent comments about my age, suggesting that perhaps I should consider retiring and enjoying my golden years. Each comment was wrapped in a smile, but the message was transparent. In 2020, during the pandemic, we worked from home for several months. It was during that period that I began to notice irregularities, bank transfers I didn't recognize, virtual meetings from which I was excluded, conversations that abruptly stopped when I entered the room. Something was happening beneath the surface. but I still didn't want to believe that my own son could betray me. The next 3 years were a progressive deterioration. Ryan went from treating me with indifference to showing open contempt. He started calling me the old man in front of employees. He ignored my phone calls. He cancelled meetings with me, claiming more important commitments. Nicole intensified her subtle campaign, suggesting that I was losing capacity and that the company needed young blood at the helm. I tried to justify every behavior. I told myself it was work stress, economic pressures, generational challenges. I wanted to believe that the child who ran among the warehouse shelves, the young man who hugged me at his mother's funeral, still existed under that mask of hostility. I clung to beautiful memories while ignoring the reality that became clearer each day. And then came that December night in 2023. The push, the fall, the laughter, the 14 people who watched me without lifting a finger. Sitting on my dark sofa with a sore body, I finally understood that the son I loved no longer existed. Perhaps he had never truly existed. Perhaps everything had been a masterful act, waiting for the right moment to take off the mask. That night, as the blood dried on my temple and silent tears ran down my cheeks, I stopped looking for explanations. I stopped justifying the unjustifiable and began to think with cold, calculated clarity about what I needed to do. The next morning, I woke up early with a numb body and a crystal-clear plan in my mind. I would not act with rage or revenge. I would act with the same strategic intelligence I had applied for 32 years to build my company from nothing. But first, I needed concrete information, solid evidence of what was truly happening. I made coffee and sat in front of the computer in my home office. I opened the company's financial files, to which I still had complete access as the majority owner. For the next 4 hours, I meticulously examined every transaction from the last 6 months. What I discovered confirmed my worst suspicions. There were irregular transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Small amounts at first, $2,000 here and $3,000 there. But in the last 3 months, the figures had increased considerably. $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. Adding everything up, Ryan had diverted approximately $130,000 to that ghost account over the last year. I wrote down every date, every amount, every reference code in a specific notebook that I kept in my bedroom safe, but the money was only part of the problem. I needed to know what else they were planning. The next day, Monday, December 9th, I arrived at the office at 7 a.m., 2 hours before any other employee. I went directly to Ryan's office. The door was locked, but I kept a master copy of all the locks in the building since we had bought it in 2011. His desk was surprisingly tidy. Folders perfectly aligned, pens in their place, computer screen off. But I knew where to look. For years, I had taught him that truly important documents should never be in plain sight. I checked the bottom drawers until I found an unmarked brown folder. Inside were documents that chilled my blood. Printouts of emails between Ryan and Nicole, discussing the plan to remove the old man. Drafts of a power of attorney that would strip me of executive power in the company. I even found information about assisted living facilities specializing in patients with cognitive decline. In the margin of one of those brochures, in Nicole's handwriting, I read, "Viable option if he doesn't sign voluntarily." I photographed every document with my cell phone. 27 photographs in total, each one more devastating than the last. I put everything back exactly as I had found it, and left the office before anyone arrived. But I needed more. The documentary evidence was valuable, but I wanted to understand the full extent of the conspiracy. So I discreetly contacted Carol Jenkins, our head of human resources, who had been working with me for 18 years. I met her at a coffee shop far from the office. Carol arrived visibly nervous. When I explained what I had discovered, she sighed with relief. "Mr. Miller, I've wanted to talk to you for months, but I feared the consequences," she confessed. She revealed to me that Ryan had been holding secret meetings with 5 key employees, promising them promotions and salary increases once he had total control of the company. She also told me something I would never have imagined. In October, Ryan had contacted a private neurologist asking him to evaluate my mental capacity. The doctor, an ethical professional, had refused to make a false evaluation, but the simple fact that my son had tried to obtain a fraudulent diagnosis showed how far he was willing to go. Carol gave me names, dates, specific contexts. I took mental notes of every detail. I asked her to continue acting normally without revealing our conversation to anyone. She agreed, thanking me for years of fair treatment and promising loyalty. For the next 2 weeks, I became an invisible observer of my own company. I arrived early, stayed late. I listened to conversations without actively participating. Ryan and Nicole had become careless, confident that I was too naive or weak to suspect anything. On the afternoon of December 14th, I arrived at the office unannounced after a supposed doctor's appointment. Ryan was not in his office. I asked his assistant where he was, and she stammered an unconvincing excuse. I waited patiently until he returned 2 hours later, smelling of alcohol and looking relaxed. I discreetly followed him for several days. I discovered that he held frequent meetings with a lawyer specializing in corporate law. I researched the firm's name, Johnson & Partners, known for aggressive cases of hostile corporate restructurings. That confirmed that Ryan wasn't just dreaming of controlling the company. He was executing a legal plan to seize it from me. I also discovered something personally painful. On December 19th, while following him at a safe distance, I saw Ryan and Nicole having dinner at an expensive restaurant in the Gold Coast. I activated my phone's voice recorder and sat at a nearby table, partially hidden by a decorative column. I heard fragments of conversation that broke my heart. Nicole said, "Your father is an anachronistic obstacle. Once we have total control, we'll sell the company to the highest bidder. With those millions, we can go live in Miami Beach and forget about this provincial circus." Ryan responded, laughing, "The old man doesn't even know how to use email correctly. He'll never see what's coming." I saved that recording as if it were liquid gold. Every word, every scornful laugh was digitally recorded. That night, alone at home, I listened to the recording 3 times in a row, not to torture myself, but to eliminate any trace of doubt or sentimentalism that could weaken my determination. I organized all the collected information systematically. I created 3 identical physical folders with copies of all documents, photographs, recordings, and chronological notes. One I kept in my personal safe, another in a bank safety deposit box that I opened specifically for this purpose. The third I sent by certified courier to my daughter Ashley's house in London with a letter briefly explaining the situation and asking her to keep the material unopened unless something happened to me. I also contacted my family doctor, Dr. David Roberts, who had been treating me for 20 years. I explained that I needed a complete neurological and psychiatric evaluation to certify my full mental capacity. He immediately understood the implications and scheduled an exhaustive battery of tests with 3 different specialists for me. The results arrived on December 22nd. Excellent cognitive capacity for my age, above average functional memory, no signs of neurological deterioration. I requested certified copies of all medical reports and added them to my evidence folders. While methodically gathering evidence, I maintained a facade of absolute normality. I continued to attend meetings, sign routine documents, behaving exactly as Ryan expected me to behave. A tired, disconnected old man passively waiting for his retirement. But internally, I was building a bulletproof legal case. Each document organized chronologically, each financial irregularity precisely documented by bank records, each treacherous conversation digitally recorded, each attempt at medical manipulation backed by professional testimonies. On December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, I sat again in my home office with the 3 folders in front of me. I reviewed them completely once more, verifying that nothing crucial was missing. Then I knew I was ready, not to confront, not to beg for explanations, but to execute the most devastating response Ryan could imagine. A response born not of hatred, but of the cold certainty that actions have inevitable consequences. On the morning of December 27th, I called Thomas Stone. My minority partner owned 20% of the company's shares since 2003, when I offered him equity participation in recognition of his exceptional work for over a decade. Thomas was 64 years old. He was a retired industrial engineer and had been my right-hand man during the most difficult years. Thomas, I need to see you urgently. Today, if possible, at your house, not the office, I told him bluntly. I heard his silence on the other end of the line, processing the gravity of my tone. I'll be waiting for you at 5 p.m., he finally responded. I arrived punctually at his house in Lincoln Park, a quiet Chicago neighborhood where he had lived with his wife for 30 years. He received me in his personal study, a room lined with shelves, full of technical books and family photographs. We sat in 2 leather armchairs in front of a lit fireplace. I took out one of the folders I had prepared and placed it on the table between us. Before I open this, I need you to understand something. What you are about to see will permanently change your perception of people you thought you knew. And I need to know if I can count on you for what's coming, I warned him, looking directly into his eyes. Thomas leaned forward with a serious expression. John, we've been working together for 30 years. You've been more than a partner. You've been a brother. Whatever you need, count on me, he affirmed without hesitation. I opened the folder, and for the next hour, I meticulously showed him every piece of evidence. The bank statements with irregular transfers, the photographs of documents found in Ryan's office, the transcripts of recorded conversations, the drafts of fraudulent powers of attorney, the brochures of assisted living facilities with notes about forcibly committing me. I watched as Thomas's face transitioned from initial skepticism to disbelief, then to contained indignation, and finally to cold anger. When I finished explaining everything, including the public humiliation during the company dinner, he remained silent for several minutes. That son of a bitch, he finally muttered, using language I had never heard from him in 3 decades. John, you gave him everything. You sacrificed years of your life to build something valuable, to leave him. And this is how he repays you, trying to steal the company and lock you away as if you were disposable clutter. I nodded slowly. That's why I need you, Thomas. I've made a decision, and I require your legal and operational support to execute it correctly. He looked at me expectantly. I'm going to sell the company, my 80%, and I'm going to do it without Ryan finding out until it's absolutely irreversible. Surprise crossed his face. Sell, John? That company is your entire life, everything you built over 32 years. His voice cracked slightly. I interrupted him calmly. Exactly. It's my creation, my heritage, my decision, and I prefer to sell it to people who value it rather than leave it in the hands of someone who only sees numbers in a bank account. Thomas reflected for a few moments. And what will happen to the employees? To Carol? To Albert? To all the people who have been working faithfully with you for years? It was a legitimate concern that I had considered extensively. That's why I need to find serious buyers who will maintain the operation and respect labor contracts, not speculators who will dismantle everything to sell off pieces. And what about me? He asked directly. You will keep your 20%. The new owners will need someone experienced who knows the internal workings. You will be Chief Operating Officer under the new structure. I will guarantee it contractually. Your position will improve, not worsen, I assured him. Thomas leaned back in the armchair, processing all that information. This will completely destroy Ryan. He will lose the company, the inheritance, everything he hoped to gain with his dirty maneuvers. I looked at him steadily. It's not destruction, Thomas. It's a lesson. My son needs to learn that actions have consequences, that respect is not stolen, it's earned, and that underestimating older people, thinking we are weak or foolish, is a devastating mistake. My partner nodded slowly, understanding the dimension of what was about to happen. You'll need specialized legal advice. This must be done impeccably, so there are no legal loopholes Ryan can exploit later, he warned pragmatically. I've already thought of that. That's why tomorrow I have an appointment with Eric Hayes from Hayes & Associates. He's the best corporate lawyer in Chicago, I'm told, a specialist in mergers, acquisitions, and corporate restructurings. I want you to come with me to that meeting I proposed. I'll be there, he immediately confirmed. Then he added something that moved me. John, I deeply regret not intervening that night during dinner. I saw Ryan push you, saw you fall, and I froze. I have no excuse. It was pure cowardice, and I'm ashamed every time I remember it. I placed my hand on his shoulder. I don't blame you, Thomas. No one knew how to react to something so brutal and unexpected. But now I need you to act, to accompany me in this process, and help me execute it correctly. That will be your redemption, if you feel you need it. We spent the next 2 hours discussing technical aspects. Thomas knew every operational detail of the company, main suppliers, current contracts, financial projections, strengths, and weaknesses of the business model. All that information would be crucial for presenting the company to potential buyers attractively but honestly. We also reviewed the corporate bylaws we had drafted years ago. We confirmed that I indeed had the absolute legal right to sell my shares without requiring approval from other partners. Ryan was not a shareholder, merely an employee with a management position. He had no veto power over decisions I made regarding my majority stake. Before I left, Thomas embraced me warmly. We're going to do this right, brother. We're going to protect your dignity and teach that boy the lesson he should have learned years ago, he promised with an emotional voice. The morning of December 28th, we met at the offices of Hayes & Associates, located in a modern building in Chicago's Loop. Eric Hayes received us personally. He was 52 years old, impeccably dressed in a dark grey suit with professional yet approachable manners. I explained the entire situation to him without omitting details. I showed him the same evidence I had shared with Thomas. Eric took meticulous notes on a tablet while listening attentively. He didn't interrupt, only nodded occasionally, indicating that he was processing all the information. When I finished my account, Eric closed his tablet and clasped his hands on the desk. "Mr. Miller, legally, your position is solid. As the owner of 80% of the shares, you have the absolute right to sell them according to the bylaws I have reviewed. Your son has no equity stake. Therefore, he lacks the legal power to prevent the transaction. Could he challenge the sale afterward, alleging coercion or my mental incapacity?" I asked directly. Eric shook his head. "With the medical reports you have obtained, certifying your full cognitive capacity, that avenue would be blocked. Furthermore, the evidence you possess regarding his attempts at medical manipulation would play entirely against him in any court." Thomas intervened. "How long would we need to find serious buyers and close the operation?" Eric reflected briefly. "With a company of the size and financial soundness you described, I would say between 4 and 6 weeks. I have contacts with investment funds and business groups interested in acquisitions in the automotive sector. I can begin discreet inquiries immediately. Absolute discretion is essential. If Ryan finds out before everything is signed, he will try to sabotage the process," I warned emphatically. Eric nodded understandingly. "We will handle this with total confidentiality. Potential buyers will sign non-disclosure agreements before receiving any information. We will use code names in all communications." We left that meeting with a concrete plan established. Eric would begin immediate contacts. Thomas would prepare updated financial documentation. I would maintain the appearance of absolute normality, attending the office as always, without raising suspicion. The wheel was in motion, irreversible, devastating. On January 3rd, 2024, I received the first call from Eric. "I have 3 business groups interested," after reviewing the preliminary information. One from Chicago, another from New York City, and a third based in San Diego. All 3 have signed confidentiality agreements and want in-person meetings to evaluate the operation in more detail," he reported, in a professional but notably satisfied tone. We coordinated the meetings for specific days when Ryan would be out of Chicago. My son frequently traveled to New York City and Los Angeles visiting clients, or so he officially claimed. I suspected he was also meeting with his lawyer, planning his strike against me, without imagining that I was executing mine simultaneously. The first meeting was on January 8th with representatives from Brava Mercantile Group, a Chicago-based company specializing in acquisitions of family businesses in the industrial sector. We met in a neutral conference room that Eric had rented specifically for these negotiations. 3 executives arrived: the investment director, the head of financial analysis, and a corporate lawyer. For 4 hours, they thoroughly reviewed every aspect of my company. Thomas presented growth projections backed by historical data from the last 10 years. I personally explained the operating philosophy, relationships with key suppliers, and the loyalty of our customer base. I answered every question with absolute transparency. When they asked why I was selling such a successful company, I responded with calculated truth. I am 67 years old. I have dedicated 32 years to building this. I want to retire knowing that it will be in competent hands that respect the employees and uphold the values I have always defended. I mentioned nothing about Ryan or the real reasons. That was irrelevant information for the commercial transaction. The financial director seemed impressed by our solidity. Operational margins are excellent. The client portfolio is well diversified. I see no red flags in any indicator, she commented, reviewing figures on her laptop. The second meeting was on January 11th with Castilian Investments from New York City. This group was more aggressive, focused on accelerated growth through deep restructurings. Their representatives constantly spoke about resource optimization and profit maximization. They immediately generated distrust in me. When they asked what would happen to the current employees, the operations director responded evasively, "We would evaluate each position according to efficiency criteria." That answer was enough for me to mentally discard them. I would not sell my company to vultures who would fire loyal people to inflate margins for 2 years before reselling. The third meeting on January 15th was with Nolan Enterprises from San Diego. Only 2 people arrived, the founder and principal owner, Victor Nolan, a 58-year-old entrepreneur with 20 years of managing companies in the automotive sector, and his financial director, Robert Smith. From the very first moment, I perceived a qualitative difference. Victor didn't fire aggressive technical questions. He conversed, listened, understood. "Mr. Miller, I bought my first company 18 years ago. It was a family business in crisis that the founder sold with a broken heart because his children didn't want to continue it. I understand what it means to let go of something you built with blood, sweat, and decades of sacrifice," he said, looking directly at me. I explained my business philosophy: treating suppliers with respect, paying fair wages, maintaining quality above immediate profits. Victor nodded understandingly. "Those are exactly the principles I apply in my companies. Loyal employees are the most valuable asset. Satisfied customers return generation after generation. Profits come as a consequence of doing things correctly, not the other way around." We talked for 6 hours, not just about numbers and contracts, but about values, visions, legacy. Victor told me how he had rescued 3 family businesses in similar situations, keeping them operational, respecting work teams, growing organically without sacrificing quality. He showed verifiable references, employee testimonials, sustained growth data. At the end of that meeting, Victor extended his hand. "If you decide to sell to us, I personally guarantee that your company will continue to operate with the same values you established. Employees will keep their jobs. Thomas will be Chief Operating Officer with real authority, not a decorative puppet, and your legacy will be honored, not dismantled for quick profit." That night, meeting again with Thomas and Eric, we made the decision. Nolan Enterprises is the right choice. Victor Nolan understands what it means to inherit responsibility, not just by assets, I affirmed, with conviction. Thomas completely agreed. Eric nodded. "I have researched their history. It is solid, ethical. They deliver on their promises. I will proceed with the formal negotiation." The next 10 days were intense. Teams of external auditors reviewed every financial document, every contract, every legal aspect of the company. I had maintained impeccable records for decades, so the process was surprisingly smooth. They found no irregularities because none existed. In parallel, Eric negotiated specific terms of the agreement: purchase price, payment schedule, guarantees for current employees, Thomas's role in the new structure, confidentiality clauses. Every detail was meticulously discussed and put into writing with absolute legal clarity. On January 20th, we received the formal proposal. Nolan Enterprises offered $1,600,000 for 80% of the shares. The payment would be structured with $800,000 at the time of signing, another $800,000 in 2 semi-annual installments. In addition, they contractually guaranteed to maintain all current jobs for a minimum of 3 years, with Thomas as Chief Operating Officer on a 5-year contract. I reviewed those documents for hours. I wasn't looking to maximize economic gains. I was looking to ensure that what I had built for 32 years would not be destroyed by greed. That offer met that requirement absolutely. I accept the terms. Proceed with the signing, I informed Eric on January 21st. My lawyer immediately coordinated the final preparations. The official signing was scheduled for January 23rd at 10 a.m. at the offices of Notary Michael Turner in downtown Chicago. During those final days, I maintained an appearance of absolute normality. I attended the office, reviewed reports, attended routine meetings. Ryan continued to treat me with barely disguised disdain. Nicole occasionally visited the company, making condescending comments about my supposed technological incompetence. Both acted with the arrogance of someone who believes victory is assured. They never suspected anything, never remotely imagined that while they planned to steal the company from me, I was legally selling it to third parties right under their noses. The irony was almost poetic. On the night of January 22nd, the eve of the final signing, I sat in my home office with a glass of red wine. I looked at old photographs from when we inaugurated the first office in 1991. Claire was by my side, smiling, young, and full of hope. Ryan was a 6-year-old boy, holding a hand-painted sign that read, "Dad's Company." I felt deep melancholy, but no regret. I had tried to build something valuable for my son. He had chosen to despise and betray me. The consequences of those choices were about to materialize with devastating force. I put away the photographs, finished the wine, and went to sleep. For the first time in months, I slept deeply, without nightmares, without anguish. The peace that comes from knowing you have made the right decision, however painful it may be. The next morning, I woke up early. I put on my best gray suit. I looked in the mirror and saw a man who had recovered his dignity. I was not the victim Ryan pushed to the ground 6 weeks ago. I was the strategist who had turned humiliation into emancipation. I left home heading for the notary's office, knowing that in a few hours my life would change irreversibly, and my son's life would too. I arrived at the notary's office at 9:40 a.m. Victor Nolan and Robert Smith were already there, chatting quietly in the waiting room. Thomas appeared 5 minutes later, followed by Eric carrying a leather briefcase full of documents. Notary Michael Turner received us in his spacious and formal office with mahogany shelves and windows overlooking Michigan Avenue. The signing was methodical and solemn. The notary read each clause of the contract aloud. I signed each page with a firm hand without hesitation. Victor did the same. Thomas signed as a witness and future Chief Operating Officer. At 11:17 a.m. on January 23, 2024, the company I had built for 32 years officially changed hands. The notary certified the signatures, sealed the documents, and provided authenticated copies for each party. Victor shook my hand firmly. "Mr. Miller, it is an honor to continue the legacy you built. I promise I will honor it." I nodded with genuine gratitude. "Take good care of the people who work there. They are the true value of what you have just acquired." We left the notary's office around noon. Eric accompanied me to a nearby coffee shop where we sat down to review the next steps. Now comes the delicate part. You must officially inform your son about the transaction. Legally, you were not obligated to do so before the signing, but it is inevitable that he will find out immediately, my lawyer explained. I know. In fact, I want to be the one to tell him personally this afternoon, I affirmed with cold determination. Eric nodded understandingly. Do you want me to be present during that conversation? I shook my head. It won't be necessary. This is something between my son and me, but stay reachable in case any legal emergency arises. I returned home and called Ryan from my landline. He answered on the fourth ring with an irritated voice. What do you want, Dad? I'm busy. I maintained a neutral, cold tone. I need to see you at the office at 4 p.m. It's urgent and non-negotiable. I heard his exaggerated sigh on the other end. Can't it wait? I have meetings scheduled. My response was sharp. Cancel whatever you have, 4 o'clock. Don't be late. I hung up without waiting for a reply. Over the next few hours, I mentally organized every word I would say. There would be no shouting or emotional reproaches, just a cold presentation of accomplished facts. I rehearsed the speech in front of the mirror until I had memorized it perfectly. At 3:30 p.m., I arrived at the office. Carol saw me enter, and I noticed concern on her face. I had warned her that morning by the message that something important would happen that day. Is everything all right, Mr. Miller? She asked discreetly. It will be soon, Carol. Very soon, I replied, with a reassuring half-smile. I locked myself in the boardroom and placed 3 sets of documents on the table: the notarized purchase agreement, the bank statements showing the irregular transfers Ryan had made, and the photographs of the documents I found in his office, planning to forcibly remove me. Ryan arrived at 4:08 p.m., 8 minutes late, as was his recent custom. He entered the boardroom with an expression of barely contained annoyance. This better be important, because I cancelled a meeting with a big client. I didn't respond. I simply pointed to the chair opposite me. Sit down. Something in my tone alerted him. He sat down slowly, looking at the documents on the table without yet understanding them. I maintained silence for 10 full seconds, letting the tension build. Finally, I spoke in a slow, icy voice. Ryan, 6 weeks ago, you brutally pushed me during a company dinner. I fell to the floor in front of 14 witnesses. I hit my head. I was bleeding. And you sat in my place, laughing, while you called me a stupid old man. Do you remember? His face paled slightly, but he tried to maintain his composure. Dad, that was a misunderstanding. I had a bit to drink and I interrupted him, raising my hand. Don't interrupt me, I'm not finished. I took the bank statements and slid them towards him. Over the last year, you have diverted $130,000 from the company to a personal account. Here is every transaction documented with date and time. Ryan looked at the papers without touching them, as if they burned. That was for strategic investments that I was going to report later. Another pathetic lie. I ignored his excuse and picked up the photographs of the documents found in his office. Here are drafts of a power of attorney to strip me of executive authority, information about assisted living facilities, notes about forcibly committing me if I didn't sign voluntarily. Your wife wrote viable option in the margin. The color completely drained from his face. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I continued relentlessly. I also have recordings of conversations where you and Nicole plan to sell the company as soon as you remove me. where you call me an anachronistic obstacle and laugh at my supposed technological incapacity? Do you want to listen to them, or is it enough to know they exist? Ryan began to stammer. Dad, we never, that's not… I interrupted him again, this time with an even colder voice. Be quiet. I have spent 6 weeks meticulously investigating your every move, every lie, every betrayal, every attempt to steal what I built for 32 years. You thought I was too old, too foolish, too weak to notice. You were completely wrong. I took the certified notarized contract and placed it directly in front of him. This morning at 11:17, I sold 80% of my shares in this company to Nolan Enterprises of San Diego for $1,600,000. The transaction is complete, signed, certified, and absolutely irreversible. The silence that followed was absolute. Ryan took the document with trembling hands and began to read. I watched his eyes scan the lines as devastating comprehension settled in his brain. His lips moved without emitting a sound, as if he were reading a death sentence. This can't be real. You can't do this. I'm your son. This company is my inheritance. I worked here for years. His voice was a choked, desperate lament. I looked at him without a shred of compassion. You worked here for years, waiting for the moment to take it from me, not with honest effort, but with manipulation, theft, and plans to lock me away in an assisted living facility. Now face the consequences. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. You can't do this to me. I'll challenge the sale. I'll have you declared mentally incompetent. I cut him off with a voice like a whip. Sit down immediately. Something in my tone forced him to obey. I then pulled out the certified medical reports. 3 different specialists have evaluated my cognitive capacity in the last 4 weeks. Excellent memory, intact reasoning, no signs of deterioration. Any attempt to challenge the sale based on my supposed incapacity will be destroyed in court using these documents. Ryan looked at the medical reports, and something broke inside him. His shoulders slumped, his hands trembled uncontrollably. Why? Why are you doing this to me? He asked with a broken voice. I leaned forward, looking directly into his eyes. Because you pushed me to the floor and laughed at my humiliation. Because you stole money that wasn't yours. Because you planned to lock me away as if I were disposable garbage. Because you forgot that respect is not automatically inherited. It is earned by actions. And your actions showed that you deserve to inherit absolutely nothing of what I built. Tears began to run down his cheeks, not tears of remorse, but of impotent rage and despair. You'll regret this. I swear. You will regret this, he threatened weakly. I shook my head. No, Ryan. The only one who will regret it is you. For the rest of your life, you will remember this moment as the instant you lost everything due to your own arrogance and stupidity. I stood up, gathered my documents, and walked towards the door. Before leaving, I turned one last time. The new owners will take operational control next week. Thomas will be Chief Operating Officer. Your current position will be eliminated from the organizational structure. You have until Friday to collect your personal belongings. After that, I never want to see you in this building again. I left the boardroom, leaving him sitting there, destroyed, finally understanding that he had completely underestimated the man who had raised him. Barely 5 minutes after I left the boardroom, I heard hurried footsteps and muffled shouts coming from the central office. Nicole Clark, my daughter-in-law, crossed the hallway like a storm, violently opening the door. Her expression was a mixture of disbelief, rage, and panic as she saw Ryan collapsed on the table, still holding the purchase agreement. She looked at the papers, frantically scanning them, and then searched for me with her gaze, fixing icy eyes on me. "You can't do this, it's insane," she yelled, not caring if anyone heard her. She approached, launching legal threats, assuring me that everything would be challenged, that no judge would allow such an outrage. I maintained my composure and responded with an unperturbed voice. "Everything has been reviewed by recognized lawyers. There is sufficient evidence and independent medical certificates. There is no legal avenue you can use that I haven't foreseen. Neither you nor Ryan can reverse what has already been executed." Nicole continued to raise her voice, accusing me of ingratitude. She even suggested that I was destroying the family's future out of an act of irrational resentment. Ryan, however, remained petrified. He only uttered a murmur of defeat. "I didn't think you would go this far, Dad." I took a breath, feeling the weight of decades on my shoulders, but also my dignity intact. "It is not revenge, it is justice. You chose every step. You did not value effort or respect. Every decision has its consequences." The tension was maximum. Carol and 2 employees watched from a distance, not daring to intervene. The air smelled of failure and fear. Nicole, in her desperation, picked up the phone and called a trusted lawyer on speakerphone, yelling that it was all a crazy scheme, orchestrated by an old man, manipulated by abusive doctors and partners. The lawyer's tone was sharp. He asked for copies of the documentation, and while Nicole spoke, I was clear. Lawsuits will only bring shame and waste time. All movements are perfectly legal. It was then that for the first time in years, I felt Ashley's silent support. My daughter called from London, asking to join the video call. Seeing her face on the laptop screen, I noticed a dignity and firmness that evoked her mother's spirit. Ashley spoke calmly, addressing everyone. "I have seen the documentation, and I support every step Dad has taken. If you try to defame him, I will act as a witness. Dad only protected what Ryan tried to destroy out of greed and cruelty. He knew everything weeks ago. The impact was devastating." Nicole, surprised, tried to discredit Ashley, but the clarity of her speech changed the atmosphere. Carol, seeing my daughter's attitude, was encouraged to speak. "In all my years at this company, I never saw Mr. Miller act in bad faith. If I have to speak before a judge, I will." Her statement was a final dagger to the arguments of Ryan and his wife. At that instant, I felt the slow crumbling of the pillars upon which my son and his wife believed they had built their power. Nicole, seeing herself cornered, tried to negotiate. "We can reach an agreement, John," she said, this time in a slightly softer voice. But negotiation was not an option, and I made that clear. "I am not looking for agreements. This is over. The respect you disdained cannot be recovered or bought." Before leaving definitively, I observed Ryan one last time. His eyes were red, his chin trembling. Nicole muttered under her breath about appeals, courts, and possibilities, but I no longer felt fear or hatred, only a grave and solitary peace. I closed the office door, aware that I would never cross that threshold again as an owner, but having absolutely recovered my dignity and total ownership of my destiny. The following hours, instead of feeling relief, I was overcome by a bittersweet mix of sadness and liberation. I knew that the battle would now move to the courts. I had the documentation, Ashley's backing, and the firm testimony of those who had always known me as an honest man. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a nuisance, but as someone with something valuable and worthy of protection. I looked at the building from the street one last time. The afternoon light bathed the windows that for 3 decades held my dreams and sleepless nights. I knew then that I had closed a cycle and that what was truly important, the lesson, had not yet ended for Ryan. The hardest act was yet to come, silently accepting the consequences of his own decisions. As I anticipated, Ryan and Nicole did not accept defeat peacefully. On February 5th, I received official notification of a lawsuit filed in the Commercial Court Number 3 of Chicago. The plaintiffs alleged coercion, cognitive deterioration, and manipulation by third parties interested in dispossessing me of my assets. The strategy was predictable. They would try to portray me as a senile victim, manipulated by Thomas and by supposedly unscrupulous buyers. Eric Hayes analyzed the lawsuit line by line that same afternoon in his office. It is weak from the start. They lack evidence because it simply does not exist. We, on the other hand, have irrefutable medical documentation, professional testimonies, and evidence of their own attempts at fraud, he explained with professional confidence that considerably reassured me. The first preliminary hearing was set for March 18th. During the preceding 6 weeks, Eric worked tirelessly preparing our defense. He formally requested the neurological evaluations I had completed in December. He gathered sworn declarations from Carol and 4 other employees who would testify about my mental lucidity and executive capacity demonstrated until the last day before the sale. He also contacted the 3 specialists who had evaluated me, the neurologist who certified the absence of cognitive deterioration, the psychiatrist who ruled out any mental disorder, and the geriatrician who confirmed completely normal executive functions for my age. All 3 agreed to appear as expert witnesses if the case went to full trial. Meanwhile, the lawyer hired by Ryan and Nicole, a certain William Martin from Martin and Associates, attempted aggressive pressure tactics. They sent me certified letters demanding the immediate suspension of the share transfer. They threatened additional lawsuits for moral damages and economic harm. They even suggested they could file criminal charges for fraudulent administration. Eric responded to each threat with devastating professional coldness. To each intimidating letter, he responded with bulletproof legal documentation. When they threatened criminal charges, he sent copies of the bank statements showing the irregular transfers Ryan had made, accompanied by a reminder that fraudulent administration could be applied precisely against my son. The tension grew exponentially. Ryan tried to contact me directly several times. Calls I didn't answer, text messages I deleted without reading. He even appeared one afternoon at my front door, demanding to speak with me. I didn't open, simply watched from the second-floor window as he shouted for 10 minutes before leaving defeated. Ashley flew from London the week before the hearing. Her presence was a comforting balm. We had dinner calmly at my house while she reviewed all the documentation Eric had prepared. "Dad, your case is rock solid. There's no way they can lose," she affirmed with conviction, which I deeply appreciated. March 18th arrived with cloudy skies and cool temperatures. I dressed formally, a navy blue suit, white shirt, discreet tie. Eric picked me up at 8:30. Ashley accompanied us. We arrived at the courthouse 40 minutes before the appointed time. The courtroom was austere, with dark wooden walls and rows of benches reminiscent of old churches. Ryan and Nicole were already there with their lawyer, Martin, a man in his mid-40s with a grey suit and a look of superiority that would soon disappear. Nicole gave me a look full of hatred. Ryan didn't even look up. At 10 o'clock sharp, Judge Eleanor Franklin entered, a woman in her late 50s with a reputation for rigorous impartiality and little patience for frivolous cases. We all stood as she took her place on the elevated bench. The hearing began with the presentation of allegations. Martin spoke first, laying out the theory that I had been manipulated by disloyal partners, taking advantage of supposed mental vulnerability caused by my advanced age and unprocessed grief over my wife's death 6 years prior. He suggested that the sale had been orchestrated by Thomas for personal gain, dispossessing me and my legitimate heir son. I listened to that manipulative speech without showing any emotion. The magistrate occasionally took notes, her face expressionless. When Martin finished, the judge addressed Eric. "Counsel for the defense, proceed with your exposition." Eric stood up with a thick folder under his arm. He did not speak from his seat, but requested permission to approach the bench and deliver documentation directly to the magistrate. She nodded. For the next 20 minutes, my lawyer systematically presented each piece of evidence. First, the medical reports, 3 independent evaluations performed by recognized specialists, all coinciding in full cognitive capacity. The magistrate reviewed each document meticulously, then the sworn declarations of employees testifying to my active participation in business decisions until the day of the sale. Carol had written a particularly emotional testimony about my lucidity and dedication. Then came the devastating evidence against Ryan. Bank statements showing irregular transfers, photographs of documents found in his office planning to remove me through forced power of attorney, transcripts of recordings where he and Nicole discussed selling me as an anachronistic obstacle. I saw Martin pale as the magistrate examined those proofs. Ryan buried his head in his hands. Nicole whispered furiously, something inaudible. Eric continued relentlessly, explaining how precisely my son's fraudulent attempts had motivated my decision to sell before being illegally dispossessed. Finally, he presented the certified, notarized contract, signed voluntarily without any pressure, in the presence of independent legal professionals. Your Honor, this is not a case of manipulation, but of legitimate protection. My client exercised his proprietary right to safeguard assets built over 32 years against a real, documented threat of family fraud, Eric concluded in a firm but respectful tone. Judge Franklin remained silent for 3 full minutes, reviewing papers. Then she looked directly at Martin. "Counsel for the plaintiffs, do you have objective evidence to support the allegation of mental incapacity of Mr. Miller, independent medical evaluations, professional testimonies?" Martin stammered. "Your Honor, we have family testimonies about erratic behaviors." The judge interrupted him. "I asked for objective evidence, not interested opinions." The silence was deafening. Martin had nothing more. The magistrate closed the folder in front of her with a definitive gesture. This preliminary hearing does not justify a full judicial proceeding. The evidence presented by the defense demonstrates Mr. Miller's full mental capacity at the time of the transaction. The plaintiffs lack sufficient probative foundation. I dismiss the lawsuit and order the plaintiff to pay legal costs. The gavel struck the table. Everything was over. Ryan and Nicole left quickly, avoiding glances. Eric shook my hand. "Justice served, Mr. Miller." Ashley hugged me, crying tears of relief. Days later, we received official notification. The legal costs amounted to $12,000, which Ryan and Nicole had to pay jointly. Not only had they lost the company, but now they faced a significant legal debt. Justice had spoken clearly and irrefutably. 2 weeks after the court verdict, I began to plan my new life. Chicago, the city where I had lived for 67 years, now felt loaded with painful memories. Every street reminded me of moments shared with Ryan when he was a child. Every corner evoked the company that no longer belonged to me. I needed physical and emotional distance to truly start anew. Ashley suggested I move to London with her, but I gently declined the offer. Ashley, I deeply appreciate your generosity, but I need to build something of my own, not take refuge in others' lives, I explained during a video call. She understood perfectly. Then find a place where you'll be happy, Dad. You deserve it after everything. I decided to explore San Diego. That coastal city had always attracted me with its temperate climate, vibrant culture, and more relaxed pace than Chicago. In early April, I traveled there for 4 days, staying in a hotel in the Gaslamp Quarter. I walked cobblestone streets, visited the Central Market, strolled along Coronado Beach, feeling the Pacific breeze on my face. On the third day, I found the perfect apartment, a second-floor unit in a renovated modernist building, 1,200 square feet, with 2 bedrooms, a bright living room, and a large balcony with a partial ocean view. The owner, a retired architect named Frank White, was selling because he was moving with his daughter to a different city. He was asking $350,000. We negotiated briefly and closed at $330,000. I used part of the money received from the company sale to buy the apartment outright. The deed was signed on April 25th before a San Diego notary. For the first time in decades, I had no debts or heavy financial commitments. The feeling of freedom was intoxicating. I hired a moving company that transported my essential belongings from Chicago. Selected furniture, books accumulated over years, family photographs, some memories of Claire that I couldn't abandon. I left everything else behind, giving away or selling objects that represented a life that no longer existed. I settled in San Diego during May. The first few days were strange, waking up in an unfamiliar room, walking through streets where no one recognized me, buying bread at a bakery where the clerk didn't know my name. But gradually, that strangeness transformed into liberation. I was anonymous again. I could reinvent myself without carrying the weight of others' expectations. I deliberately established new routines, different from the old ones. I woke up early and walked along the beach for an hour, feeling the sand under my feet and breathing the salty air. I had breakfast in small neighborhood cafes, occasionally conversing with other regulars. I read newspapers calmly, with no rush to get to any office. The afternoons I dedicated to exploring museums and art galleries. I had always wanted to deepen my knowledge of painting and art history, but I never had the time. Now I had it in abundance. I enrolled in courses on Spanish contemporary art at the San Diego Community College. I attended twice a week, enjoying stimulating conversations with fellow students of all ages. I also resumed habits abandoned decades ago. I started cooking again, something Claire and I had enjoyed together during happy years. I prepared experimental seafood dishes on Sundays, occasionally inviting cordial neighbors I had met. I bought a bicycle and rode along the trails next to Balboa Park, which had been converted into a spectacular urban park. But I didn't completely forget pending responsibilities. Ashley had expressed interest in expanding her human resources consulting firm in London. She had been operating successfully for 5 years, but needed capital to hire more staff and open a second office. During a video call dinner in mid-May, I proposed something I had carefully considered. Ashley, I want to transfer $400,000 to you as an investment in your business. It's not a gift or a loan. It's recognition of your loyalty, your integrity, and your unconditional support during difficult months, I announced directly. I saw tears well up in her eyes. Dad, you don't need to do that. I supported you because it was right, not expecting a reward. I know perfectly well. That's precisely why I want to do it. Money should flow to those who demonstrate values worth cultivating. You honored your mother's memory, remaining integral when your brother chose betrayal. That is worth much more than any monetary amount. But this investment will allow you to build something great, I explained, with a voice full of emotion. Ashley finally accepted. The transfer was made on May the 30th. Weeks later, she sent me photographs of her new office in London, larger and more professional, with 4 new employees. Her face glowed with genuine happiness. That money had found its correct destination. With the rest of my capital, I established a conservative investment fund with a San Diego financial advisor recommended by Frank, the architect who sold me the apartment. It generated modest returns, but enough to live comfortably without immediate financial worries. I calculated that I could maintain a dignified lifestyle for 20 years or more without touching the principal capital. Weeks turned into months, and San Diego transformed into a true home. I made real friendships with people who appreciated me for who I currently was, not for the company I had built or the money I possessed. I met Henry Woods, a retired philosophy professor of 62, who lived in my same building. We often shared coffee, discussing Seneca, Stoicism, and the meaning of dignified aging. I also became close to a 70-year-old couple, Louis Shepard and his wife Carol Stone, who ran a very old bookstore in the historic center. I spent entire afternoons conversing with them among dusty shelves, discovering rare editions of Spanish classics. They gave me an antique copy of Don Quixote for my birthday in July, a gesture that deeply moved me. The San Diego social life was rich but unpretentious. I occasionally attended concerts at the San Diego Civic Theater, literary discussions at a local bookstore, film screenings at the Ken Cinema. I enjoyed the anonymity that allowed me to simply be John, a mature man interested in culture and meaningful conversations. During those months, I heard nothing directly from Ryan. Ashley occasionally informed me through brief messages. Ryan is looking for a job. Nicole is constantly pressuring him. I felt no joy at his difficulties, but neither did I feel undue pity. He had sown the wind, and now he was reaping the inevitable whirlwind. In August, sitting on my favorite wooden bench facing the Pacific Ocean, watching the Mediterranean sunset with a glass of red wine, I reflected on the complete transformation experienced in 8 months, from the humiliated man falling to the floor during a company dinner to the free man enjoying peace earned through painful but necessary decisions. I understood something fundamental. Authentic happiness does not come from accumulating wealth or controlling companies. It comes from living coherently with one's own values, surrounded by people who genuinely value you, doing things that nourish the soul instead of the ego. That night, I slept deeply, without nightmares, feeling gratitude for a second chance to live fully. While I built a quiet life in San Diego, Ryan's existence systematically crumbled like a house of cards under a hurricane. Ashley kept me informed through monthly updates, which I listened to with mixed feelings, not joy, but also not undue compassion, simply an acceptance. that the consequences had inevitably arrived. The first blow came in June. Victor Nolan, the new owner of Nolan Enterprises, implemented organizational restructuring just as he had promised. Thomas assumed complete operational management. The management team was made up of experienced professionals from the San Diego team. There was no place for Ryan in that new structure. Ashley told me the details she learned through Carol. Victor called Ryan to a formal meeting on June 3rd. He politely explained that his position was being eliminated. He offered him standard severance pay according to the labor agreement, 3 months' salary. Ryan tried to negotiate, argue, even threaten additional lawsuits. Victor simply showed him the contractual clause, allowing discretionary restructuring. Everything was legal and irreversible. Ryan left the company on June 10th, carrying a cardboard box with personal belongings. No employee said an effusive goodbye. Carol confessed to me later via message, "No one felt sorry for him. Everyone remembered how he treated you, Mr. Miller. Justice had finally arrived." Those words confirmed something I always suspected. Genuine respect is not built with titles or inheritances, but with consistent actions over the years. The severance Ryan received was approximately $25,000, a considerable amount for many, but ridiculous compared to the millions he had expected to automatically inherit. Ashley discreetly investigated and discovered that Ryan and Nicole had a significant mortgage on a luxurious apartment in an expensive area of Chicago, $400,000 pending with monthly payments of $200 to $300. Without stable employment, those payments quickly became an unsustainable problem. Ryan began a desperate search for work comparable to his previous position. He sent his resume to dozens of companies in the sector, but he was 38 years old, had limited experience outside a family business, and questionable references after being fired by the new owners. Job interviews were humiliating, Ashley recounted. He was constantly rejected. Some interviewers knew the story of the sale, others simply noticed something desperate in his attitude. By July, he had sent more than 50 applications. He only got 3 serious interviews. None resulted in an offer. Meanwhile, Nicole pressured him relentlessly. Ashley learned through a mutual contact that marital arguments were volcanic. Nicole blamed Ryan for having lost millions in inheritance for being an arrogant idiot with your father. She reproached him for not having known how to handle the situation, for having been too obvious in his intentions, for having completely underestimated that astute old man. The financial situation deteriorated monthly. In August, Ryan accepted temporary work at an automotive parts distribution company, earning less than half of his previous salary. It was a humiliating position for someone who had been a manager in a prosperous family company. His new co-workers were younger men without college degrees. He, with a business administration degree from a prestigious university, took orders from a 20-something supervisor. Nicole found the situation intolerable. Ashley informed me in September. Ryan arrived home after an exhausting day and found suitcases in the hallway. Nicole had decided to leave. She told him verbatim, "I didn't sign up for this. I thought I was marrying a millionaire heir, not an unemployed loser." She went to her parents' house in New York City. There was no negotiation or couples therapy, simply abandonment. Ryan tried to contact her repeatedly over the following weeks. Calls ignored, messages unanswered. Finally, Nicole sent a cold message through her lawyer requesting an expedited divorce. She alleged an irreversible breakdown of their shared life project. In the United States, An uncontested divorce could be completed in 3 months if both parties agreed. Nicole wanted to quickly dissolve the marriage to avoid responsibility for accumulated debts. The legal process proceeded without drama. There were no children to complicate custody. The common assets were basically debts, the apartment mortgage, and a personal loan they had taken out in May to pay the $12,000 in legal costs. They agreed to sell the apartment and divide what remained after liquidating debts, probably nothing or almost nothing. Ashley flew to Chicago in late September for professional matters. She decided to visit Ryan, not out of pity, but out of curiosity, to personally see the result of his decisions. She found him living in a small, rented apartment in a peripheral neighborhood, a place where he never would have agreed to reside during his time of arrogance. She described the scene in detail. "Dad, I saw him aged prematurely, deep dark circles under his eyes, messy clothes, a cluttered apartment with accumulated pizza boxes. He offered me instant coffee with trembling hands. He tried to justify himself, to explain that things simply got out of control. He never took real responsibility, only lamented his bad luck." Ashley cut the conversation short. "Ryan, Dad wasn't harsh, he was just, you pushed him to the floor, stole money, planned to lock him up. Now you're living the consequences of your own decisions. There's no victim here except Dad." My daughter left that apartment feeling a mix of sadness and confirmation. Sadness for a brother who could have been different. Confirmation that I had done exactly the right thing by protecting myself from someone incapable of genuine reflection. During October, Ryan tried to contact me several times, text messages that arrived late at night. "Dad, I need to talk to you, please." Calls that I automatically rejected. A long email where he tried to explain that he had learned important lessons and asked for an opportunity to demonstrate change. I did not respond to any communication, not out of cruelty, but because I understood something fundamental. Ryan was not seeking genuine reconciliation based on authentic remorse. He was seeking financial rescue disguised as repentance. His words lacked real understanding of the harm caused. They only expressed desperation about his current situation. Ashley shared my perspective. "Dad, Ryan still doesn't really understand. Maybe someday he will, maybe never, but your responsibility to teach him ended when he chose to betray you. Now, he must learn on his own, if he can." Her words resonated deeply. I had been a father for 38 years. I had taught values, given opportunities, shown correct paths. My son chose to ignore all of that. The consequences were now his only teacher. In November, I learned from Thomas that Ryan had tried to contact him, requesting job references. Thomas politely refused. "I cannot professionally recommend someone who stole from his own company and planned to lock up his father. It would compromise my integrity." That refusal closed another door for my son. Meanwhile, I continued to build a full life in San Diego. Meaningful relationships, enriching activities, genuine inner peace. The physical and emotional distance from Chicago allowed me to see the whole situation with crystal clarity. I had not made a mistake. I had defended my own dignity with legitimate legal tools against a real, documented threat. It was mid-October 2024 when I sat on my favorite wooden bench facing the Pacific Ocean, watching the waves gently break against the shore. I carried a small notebook where I had begun to write reflections on everything I had experienced during that transformative year, not to publish or share, simply to organize my thoughts and close internal cycles. 10 months had passed since that cold January morning when I signed the sale of my company, almost a year since the December night when Ryan pushed me to the ground, laughing in front of 14 silent witnesses. They seemed like decades condensed into months by the intensity of the events and the radical changes experienced. I reflected on the man I had been before that fall. John Miller, a successful businessman who measured his worth by the size of his company and the respect shown in executive meetings. A father who deluded himself into believing that unconditional love would eventually transform an arrogant son into a worthy heir. A widower who filled an emotional void with incessant work, avoiding facing profound loneliness. The John died symbolically on the marble floor of that Chicago restaurant. The man who now contemplated the sea was essentially different. He had learned a devastating but liberating lesson. Respect cannot be given away or inherited. It must be earned through consistent actions. And when someone repeatedly demonstrates that they do not deserve your respect, protecting your dignity is not cruelty, but necessary emotional survival. I thought of Ryan now, living in a tiny apartment, working temporary low-paying jobs, facing constant job rejection, abandoned by a wife who only valued him as a source of future wealth. A small part of me felt instinctive paternal pain, but a larger, wiser part understood that those circumstances were a direct product of decisions my son freely made. I didn't push him to steal $130,000. I didn't force him to plan my forced commitment. I didn't put derogatory words in his mouth when he called me a stupid old man. Each of those actions was a conscious choice, motivated by greed, contempt, and arrogance. The current consequences were simply reality, responding to his actions with precise, mathematical justice. I wondered if Ryan had truly learned anything during these difficult months. Ashley deeply doubted it. Dad, when I spoke to him in September, he was still looking to blame others. He showed no genuine understanding of how his actions deeply hurt you. Probably my daughter was right. Some people go through suffering without transforming, only accumulating resentment that reinforces their worst characteristics. But that was Ryan's battle now, not mine. I had fulfilled my responsibility as a father for 38 years. I gave him an excellent education, job opportunities, an example of honest work, and solid values. He rejected all of that, choosing a path of manipulation and betrayal. My paternal duty ended when he decided to treat me as a disposable obstacle instead of a father deserving of basic respect. I watched a seagull land near my bench, pecking at the remains of a sandwich abandoned by a tourist. That simple bird sought sustenance without philosophical complications about deserving or justice. I envied its existential simplicity for a moment. Humans carry a tremendous weight of expectations, disappointments, and broken relationships that haunt us years after precipitating events. But we also possess the unique ability to reflect, learn, and consciously rebuild ourselves. That's what I had done during these 10 months. Not just change cities or sell a company. I had rebuilt a complete concept of who John Miller was, beyond external roles of businessman or father. I discovered a genuine passion for art and history that I had ignored for decades, dedicating energy exclusively to work. I cultivated new friendships based on real shared interests, not superficial business contacts. I learned to enjoy solitude without interpreting it as failure or punishment. I reconciled with Claire's memory, allowing myself to remember her with love instead of paralyzing pain. Ashley prospered wonderfully in London. Her consulting firm grew steadily with the investment I transferred to her. We spoke weekly by video call, sharing not only news, but deep reflections on life, values, and the meaning of true family. She represented positive continuity, proof that educating with integrity does produce valuable fruits when it falls on fertile ground. Thomas sent me monthly reports on the company. Under Victor Nolan's management, it prospered remarkably. They had expanded product lines, hired 10 new employees, and opened a branch in Denver. The old workers were happy, feeling valued under leadership that prioritized people over immediate profits. Economically, I lived comfortably without excessive luxuries or extravagance. The investment fund generated sufficient returns. My own apartment eliminated worry about rent. Monthly expenses were modest: food, basic services, occasional museum and concert tickets, quarterly cultural trips across the United States. I calculated I could maintain this lifestyle until my 90s if my health allowed. But more important than financial stability was the inner peace I had gained. I slept deeply every night, without nightmares about betrayals or humiliations. I woke up every morning without anxiety about conflicting meetings or ungrateful children. I walked through San Diego feeling an existential lightness I hadn't experienced since early youth. I understood a fundamental truth that society rarely recognizes. Sometimes the most loving act a parent can perform is to set absolute boundaries against an adult child's destructive behavior. Allowing natural consequences is a more powerful lesson than repeated rescues motivated by guilt or attachment. If I had forgiven Ryan immediately, if I had reversed the sale due to emotional pressure, if I had continued to fund his lifestyle while he despised me, I would have perpetuated a destructive cycle indefinitely. My son would never have faced the reality of his actions. I would have eventually died feeling used and despised until the end. Instead, I chose my own dignity over the comfort of maintaining a facade of a non-existent, united family. That choice was brutally painful at first, but with each passing month, with each morning waking up free from toxic conflicts, with each genuine conversation with Ashley or my San Diego friends, I confirmed that I had made the right decision. The sun began to descend, tinging the sea with spectacular orange and pink hues. Tourists took photographs of the sunset. Couples walked hand in hand along the boardwalk. Children played in the sand, while parents watched from lounge chairs. Ordinary life, simple, beautiful, in its everyday normality. I closed my notebook and slowly stood up. 67 years weighed on my joints on some cold mornings, but mentally I felt younger and more vital than in decades. I walked quietly towards my apartment, stopping at my favorite bakery to buy freshly baked bread for dinner. That night, I would prepare a simple dinner, listen to the Spanish guitar music I had been enjoying so much lately, and perhaps call Henry, my philosopher neighbor, to discuss stoicism and the acceptance of realities we cannot change. The story that began with a brutal humiliation on the floor of a Chicago restaurant now ended with an older man walking peacefully through San Diego's streets, having recovered not only his dignity, but something more valuable: the profound certainty of having defended his worth as a human being against those who tried to strip him of it. Ryan would have to find his own path now. Perhaps someday he would truly understand what happened. Perhaps not, but that was no longer my responsibility. I had taught the last lesson a father can offer an adult child. Actions have inevitable consequences, and respect lost through conscious contempt can rarely be regained. That was my last lesson, the hardest, but perhaps the most necessary of all. If you liked this story, Support us with a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave us your opinions in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for joining us.